Hey, what's going on, Mission Hills Church? So excited to be back with you guys on the Continuing the Conversation feed now that we have switched over to a video podcast format. We're happy to join you in studio again with Colin and
I'm Craig.
And we just rounded out a really interesting series here called Crossroads.
It was fun. I enjoyed it.
It was a really cool take. I think we were talking about this a little bit last week, where you do a good job of looking at a story that has been told a number of times in kind of a novel way. And we've heard about the temptations of Christ before. You know, it's kind of one of the pillars of stories that are told throughout, time in, middle school, high school, kids ministry and stuff like that. So it was cool getting a unique look at that here over the last couple of weeks. So it was an interesting way to round it out too here. One of the things I had written down, I just want to dive right in with you here, is you made a really interesting point, and it hit me in particular because I've been lucky enough to be on kind of these leadership cohorts with you, Craig, where we've read through leadership books together and kind of on this young development part of the staff where we've kind of talked about becoming better leaders and strategy. And you made the point, as it pertains to sin, is what a shortcut looks like, and that's kind of what the devil provides here.
Yeah, because all sin is essentially a shortcut. Is kind of what we were kind of working through.
And that was a really interesting way of thinking about that. I really like that, but it turned on my kind of strategery brain, if you will, and I was thinking about, well, aren't we supposed to become more efficient as leaders? And I want to talk to you a little bit about what is the difference between discerning a shortcut and what is discerning, a strategy that has helped you kind of speed things up, if you will.
That's a great question. That's a good leadership question.
Wow.
And good leaders ask good questions, so yeah. I don't think it's super complex. I think the core of it is that efficiency is about producing the same results with a lower cost of resources.
Okay.
Whereas a sinful shortcut is maybe getting to the same result, but the cost is a character.
Okay.
So it's a difference between the cost being resources and the cost being character. So when you're trying to be efficient, like, okay, if we need this to happen, if we need X to happen, is there a way to get there, to identify the need faster, to allocate a smaller number of resources and use them in such a way that we accomplish what we're trying to get accomplished quicker rather than slower? So there's a cost. There's a cost either direction.
Sure.
The sin issue is the cost isn't so much the resources. In fact, if anything, it's like, oh, I can save you a bunch of resources. But in the process of doing that, there's a cost of character, or there's a cost of obedience, right? If God had told Jesus, you're gonna walk this road of suffering before you get to this point where you have control over all the world, and Satan's like, well, I can get you to the point where you get control over the whole world, but you don't have to be obedient, right? And it's going to be faster, so that might be a reduction in resources, but more importantly, it's the cost of character and obedience.
With needing to bow down to him. That was the cost that he was asked for with the shortcut.
It's the cost of, giving his worship to Satan, but it's also the cost of no longer being obedient to God. And I don't know that you can have one without the other, right? The moment we stop being obedient, we actually start being obedient somewhere else.
And that's kind of the short-term and the long-term cost of what that shortcut is going to be. Short-term is you have focus your worship on Satan. Long-term is you are no longer being obedient to God. And it's the consideration of both of those pieces of Christ in that moment that is so amazing to see. Because I feel like oftentimes we are good at discerning, like, okay, what's this going to cost me in the short term? Okay, that's fine. I will do this thing. Or how is this going to affect me in the long term? That's not okay. I won't do it. But it's rare are we able to combine the two.
Yeah.
I feel like.
No, I like that a lot. Yeah, I think at the heart of it, as leaders, and whether that's in an organization or in a family or in a neighborhood community, whatever, as leaders, one of the things we're asking is, can I get there quicker? And can I get there at a lower cost? But we have to ask the question, but what's the cost of getting there quicker and faster or whatever that I'm not necessarily seeing? That's the concealed cost, right? And certainly if it's a cost of character, we got to make sure we're not paying that.
Yeah, that's really good. I want to chase a rabbit hole on this real quick, and I want to ask you in particular, because I know you are really good at planning out your time that you have here at church. You're like, I've got to tackle X, Y, and Z this week. I'm going to make sure I have time blocked off to tackle X, Y, and Z. So when you develop out these strategies that help you kind of condense projects or condense any sort of piece of your schedule that you're looking at, how do you make sure that remaining time that you have left over isn't immediately monopolized by the tyranny of the urgent? So if you've got something that's 3 hours and you work and work and work for a month, by getting that down to 2 hours, you've now got an extra hour in your day where you don't have to tackle that. How do you make sure that hour isn't immediately consumed?
So first off, it often is. So the answer is, how do you do this? The answer is badly, poorly. Far more often than I would like. Yeah, I mean, actually happened this week. I actually had a little bit of a block of time that didn't have anything scheduled. It wasn't intentional. It was unintentional. It just happened to be something had canceled. It's like, oh, I've got a 2-hour block. And because I had a 2-hour block where I wasn't planning on what I was doing, I actually used most of that block answering emails that honestly I probably didn't need to answer. Kind of delved into some stuff that I probably could have delegated that to somebody and they would have done it, at least close to as good a job as I did. But I was like, well, I got the time. And I always feel a little weird about delegation because I'm like, am I just giving somebody a job that I don't want to do? And actually that one looked kind of fun. I like to get into the weeds sometimes. And so I did it. And pretty soon I was like, oh, I just used up the entire block. And it was not up here. It was not working on the organization. It was working in the organization. We use that leadership lingo sometimes. So just to be really clear, I screw it up a lot. The way that I keep from screwing it up is that I schedule it. So if I've got that block and I can see it in advance, I'll go in and I'll put what I'm going to do in that time. I'll go, this is thinking time. And I don't know, for whatever reason, when I look at the calendar and it says the next hour is thinking time, like I know, oh, I'm going to go over to my chair. I've got this notebook that I'm using. I've got a set of questions that I've outlined for multiple sessions, and I'm going to sit down. I'm going to answer the next question. And so I force myself, because I've got a calendar, to follow the calendar. I'm a little bit of a rule follower, honestly. A lot of people may not think that, but actually, once the system's in place, like if you're going to buck the system, like you got to give me a pretty good reason. I want you to follow the rules, and I'm a rule follower. But I have to put the system in place. So I have to schedule this, what I'm going to do with it. Otherwise, yeah, it'll get sucked up.
I will say, looking at your schedule the first time terrified me because it's kind of this 8 to 5. There is color blocks the whole way down. I'm like, you're doing something every minute of the day, and you're like, well, I've got 3 hours of free time. And I had never thought about my schedule like that, where when I've got the free time, I just don't have anything in there. And taking that piece and using it where it's intentional towards whatever I want to accomplish is really been helpful.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. When it truly is free time, when it's blank, like, I don't know, I'm going to do something, but it's probably not going to be uber useful, right? Yeah. So yeah, you plan those things out, and I do that as well with. I even have a block in my schedule that says this is agenda creation time for next week. So I'm going to be in 3 or 4 meetings next week that I'm responsible for the agenda. So I've got a block on Thursday every day, half an hour. Plan your agenda so you can get it out to people in advance. And so yeah, it's pretty minutia. And then I put things on the calendar like what I call do for one blocks. So I got this from Andy Stanley, do for one what you wish you could do for everybody. I can't meet with everybody from the church. And I'm too much of an introvert to live. Even if I had the time to do it, it would kill my soul. But I really like people and actually really like connecting with people. And so I usually have a couple of those slots on my calendar. And what that means is that my assistant can look and go, oh, there's an open do for one slot here. And even though there may be a block of time that's not filled in, it's not a do for one thing. Do for one happens here and here, right? And so she can fill those in and they're always full. But she can't schedule a do for one somewhere else because I'm being very intentional about I'm going to make room for 2 of these, 2 hours a week for these kinds of things. Yeah, so calendar is the tool. It's the key.
That's great. You're one of the pros I've ever seen at making room for things when they need to have room made for them, which I think is a perfect segue into the next question I wanted to ask you is oftentimes you tackle, or other preachers will tackle something that's in the news in a sermon application or something like that. You make space in your sermon for these things that are happening. How do you go about discerning this is good this week? I mean, I know a lot of it's timing too, but and then more so than other people I've ever seen in the past, you say, here's how this applies to one side, here's how this applies to the other side, here's how we should think about it biblically. So how do you go about doing that? Because I can't imagine that you write your sermon and you say, leave room for political / pop culture moment here.
No, okay, so again, how do I do it? Poorly sometimes. And this week was a great example. So I made this comment when I was talking about the idea of shortcuts, and all sin kind of being a shortcut. I'm sorry, no, actually it was about the more we think of ourselves as servants, the less likely we are to commit a sin.
Yes.
Okay? And so I was making the point that, well, let me say this. The point I wanted to make was when employees think of themselves as servants of their employer, they're much less likely to steal from their employer. Like that's a pretty innocuous statement, right? It's just like, yeah, if I think I'm as a government employee, I'm serving the American people, I'm probably not going to steal from the American people. That's all I wanted to say.
Right.
And I did a dumb thing. I did an ill-considered thing. I thought, I've been seeing things about the DOJ stuff, the Department of Government Efficiency, and a lot of waste that they've found, and what looks like some theft that's been found in different places, which, by the way, in my mind, that was like, it had nothing to do with Democrat or Republican. It's government. There's a word for it. It's called graft. There's probably not a government in the world that doesn't have some of it, right? It in no way was my thinking like, oh yeah, we're really finally finding out how terrible the Democrats are or the Republicans. It wasn't that at all. There was just no thought. It was just, everybody's talking about this right now, so I'll kind of make the point. Yeah, if government employees did this, but I mentioned DOJ, and I made a mistake, and that is I missed a principle. And so to answer your question, like how do you do this? I filter it through principles. And one of my core principles is heat distorts light. So when you think about if you're driving down the highway in the middle of the summer and the road's really warm, right? You look off in the distance and you get these wavy lines.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's actually heat rising. It's distorting light in its transmission through the air, right? And I've realized that when a hot topic is going on, when an issue is hot, people don't hear what you say. They hear what they feel. Right? They hear what they're already feeling about the issue on either side. And it's bizarre to me. It took me a long time to learn this because I would say something that I thought, this is very discerning, this is very balanced, this is very middle of the road. And people on this side, if we're thinking politics, they would hear it like I was supporting this side. And people on this side would hear it like I was supporting that side. And I'm like, I literally criticized both sides, but you think I just criticized you. And I began to realize, heat distorts light. So in this particular case this weekend, I messed up. I didn't think of it as a hot topic in the way that it was heated, right? It was just, it's a contemporary thing, so I'll just use this contemporary example. And I messed up. And when I say that, I really mean that. I messed up. I'm not saying people are overly sensitive and everybody's just a bunch of sensitive little snowflakes. It's not what I'm saying at all. Because what I realized after the fact was, like, there are people's jobs on the line. There are federal workers who are getting laid off, which I knew. My daughter's one of them. My daughter works at a lab at CU, and she's NIH funded. And so they have paused all of those funding things. She still has a job right now, but she has no idea what it's going to look like when that particular grant runs out. And so, like, I really was not pro everything that's happening over at DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. It wasn't pro everything that's happening. In fact, I even said in that message that, hey, listen, Fox News said this, and it was just totally, it was wild.
Wrong.
It was wrong. So I specifically said, make sure you check your sources, because I wanted to communicate. I'm not saying everything we're hearing is right, but I've read enough and I've fact checked enough to go, well, there are some things here as we would fully expect. But I didn't catch that, man, I was actually speaking to something that touched on people's personal lives. And, man, it was my mistake. And so if that was you and I hurt your feelings, you have every right to have your feelings hurt on that. Your pastor was not sensitive to you. I am sorry. One of the things I say all the time is my job as your pastor is to disappoint you at a rate you can understand or you can handle. That's one of those examples. I hope you hear my heart on it. It was never actually, I didn't. Here's when I realized that I had made a mistake. It was before I got any feedback, and I didn't get. When I say feedback, it's not like there were dozens and dozens and dozens, but there was a handful, and they were respectful, and we've had good conversations. But here's when I actually realized that I'd made the mistake. It wasn't when I saw the first email or the first contact request. It was the 11 a.m. service on Sunday when I made the same point I had, and there were some people that went yes, and I went, oh no.
Oh no.
Because that was not my point. My point was not, yes, don't we love what they're doing?
And they were receiving it through their lens.
They were receiving it through
it.
that lens, which, and again, I understand where they're coming from. There's been a lot of frustration with the way government has spent money. I get that. But I'm not necessarily in favor of the way we're tackling it right now. I think it's complicated. There's parts of it I like. There's parts of it I don't. I'm usually kind of discerning, and that puts me, I don't think of myself as middle of the road, because I think middle of the road has this connotation of I'm not taking a side. I prefer to think of myself as discerning, where I go, there's some value over here, and they're not wrong over here about this. And that kind of puts me like, well, I can't be all the way over here or all the way over here. And people go, oh, that's middle of the road. Well, maybe it is, but it's not because I'm not thinking it through. I'm a little more nuanced maybe. But when they pumped their fists and I was like, oh, yeah, I communicated in a way that looked like I was 100% on. And I thought I hadn't. I was intentional about not, but heat distorts light. and everybody hears it through those lenses. And so, yeah, long answer to your question, like how do I decide when to do those things? Not always well. And in general, I don't do many of them. Because,
it's true.
Because of that principle. And so it's interesting. People often come up to me after a big issue has happened in our culture and go, hey, why didn't you talk about it this weekend? Because heat distorts light. I was aware of it. Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I get people that are mad at me because I didn't address an issue that happened like late Saturday night. I'm not reading the news Saturday night. I'm not scrolling social media Saturday night, Sunday morning. So if somebody doesn't come and tell me, I don't know.
Well, you're also usually not doing rewrites on your sermon after you have done the first
Yeah,
service.
but like sometimes when there's a shooting or something like that, yeah, that would bear talking about. And so if I don't talk about it, there's one of two reasons. Number one, I literally didn't know about it because I'm practicing a media fast in preparation for preaching. Or two, I decided it was a heat distorts light situation. And so you'll often hear that I will address those a week later, or I'll address them maybe even longer than that because I'm waiting for the heat to settle down so we can have a nuanced conversation. And that's just part of pastoring people.
Which is just time.
It's time.
You know, that goes into it too. Yeah. It makes me think of, this example makes me think of Colbert when he first came out, where everyone loved him because, you know, right side thought he was with them and left side thought he was making fun of the right side. And so it was the total lens perspective thing that you were talking about, where everybody loved him, but half of them loved him because they thought he was one thing, and then the other half loved him because they thought he was something else. So it's totally, he was delivering the same message to the same group of people, but they were receiving it through the lens that they wanted to receive it through.
All perspective.
Which is, it got to be tough because you can't control that.
No. I do my best. And this is one, like this past weekend, I was like, once I realized I had inadvertently stepped into this, and I'd hurt some people, and I, again, very sorry for that. You know, I think in my younger years, I would have been like beating myself. I can't believe I did that. Now, it's not that it doesn't matter. I just have a little bit clearer sense of my own abilities. I'm going to make mistakes. And this is when I was like, I can tell you clearly my heart was not to go pro DOGE. It was just like, oh, this is happening right now. So it's a way to illustrate this point. So my motive was clear. I don't think there was any other motive than that. There was no political agenda. And given that that was my motive, like I'm not smart enough or foreseeing enough. I don't have the ability of foresight enough sometimes to anticipate how something might be hotter than I thought it was. And so, like, I was genuinely sorry that I did that. And what I've said to those people and just said here was, I'm sorry. Yeah. It was not what I intended. Please be gracious with me. Hopefully I don't keep disappointing you at a rate you can't handle. But I also I was able to sleep that night because I was like, yeah, I didn't do it right, but I'm not always going to get it right.
Well, I'm glad you said sleep because that kind of touches on the last thing I want to talk to you about here. Just a little bit of I enjoy this feed here because I think it's a little bit of a peek behind the curtain into not only your and my life, but kind of into just the roles that you get in a big church here. And we've got Robert Watson's coming in to preach this weekend, who is a dear friend of Mission Hill Church. We're really excited to have him. He's from Sun Valley. If you guys haven't watched him before, head back onto our channel and check out his previous messages. He's awesome. He is. But then right after that, we are diving into a 6-week sermon series, which is going to be fairly intense content, not explicit or anything like that. It's 6 weeks of good content that we're going to be pouring heavy into.
Typically family friendly.
All of it. Yeah, probably not the greatest choice of words, but it's just going to be.
I should say that we are going to talk about Abraham and Isaac.
Oh, okay.
If you know that story, like make sure you haven't had a fight with your kid before you bring him to worship service.
So nothing's misconstrued.
Nothing's misconstrued.
But then,
or if you need to scare the bejesus out
go
of
either
them,
way.
You make sure you bring them to that message with you.
Be like, see? And then right on the heels of that, we have 6 Easter services coming into that. And so you coming off of being sick for, I think, since Isaac was involved in the story. Yeah. I want to talk to you about Rhythms of Rest a little bit here.
Okay.
Just as we kind of go out of a sermon series into a break weekend for you, if you will, into kind of a longer stretch that we have coming up. How do you tackle Rhythms of Rest well?
Yeah, so, I mean, we've preached on this a little bit, and so I think you can probably go back and find messages, maybe even show notes. We can tag some links to them. I think the key is a lot of times people want to talk about balance. It's not about balance, because balance is about equivalency, right? And that's not what you get in Scripture. I mean, it's not work for 3.5 days and take 3.5 days off. That would be balance. Rhythm is about what's appropriate now, but not now. And that may be very out of balance, but it's entirely appropriate, right? So if you think about the drummer on the stage drumming, like he's not hitting the kick drum and the hi-hat the same amount of time. Hi-hat usually gets hit a lot more. They're not balanced. But in rhythm, that works perfectly. So I think in terms of rhythm, and I'm looking at seasons, I'm looking out kind of going, okay, I knew this season was going to be really intense. So the next 6 weeks leading up to Easter, I'm going to preach Easter. It's kind of I kind of need to be there. It's the
You're gonna be there?
I'm the lead pastor, and it's Super Bowl Sunday for us, right? And then I usually want to be there the week after
For everyone coming back.
because there's a lot of people coming back, and new people that are coming back for their first time at a regular service, and so I usually want to make sure I preach that one as well. We're kind of moving into a season where there's going to be some commitments we're making as a church, and we'll have some opportunities to talk through that towards the end of that series, and then after Easter. Well, I need to be here for that. So I've got a long season. I'm not going to preach all 6 of the next series, but I'm going to preach most of them. And then there's Easter, and then there's right after Easter, and then there's right after that. So like we've already scheduled vacation. Like we know that's going to come, a very intense season where we're playing a solo on the drums basically, right? But that's fine as long as then you can pull back.
The guitar is going to come back in eventually and help you out.
Guitar's going to come back in eventually. So then we scheduled, okay, there's a week vacation after that. But not just that, I also then went through my schedule for the next 6 weeks after that, and I put some blocks in my calendar, and I went, don't schedule a meeting here. This is thinking time, or this is go for a walk and pray time, And again, what's on the calendar I tend to do because I'm a rule follower. So I'm intentionally not only about the vacation, but also about my rhythm after that needs to look a little bit different. And rhythm is something you do long season like that. It's something you do weekly. So I have a Sabbath. Friday's my Sabbath. It's extremely rare that I schedule anything on Friday, okay? That's a weekly rhythm. But then there's also rhythms throughout the day even. And I go, oh, this was a crazy number of meetings today, and they were intense meetings, so I'm leaving at 2 o'clock. Right, I just need to. That's what it means for me to stay healthy. So there's even those kinds of things throughout the day. So you got big macro seasons, micro seasons. In general, that's how I'm thinking about making sure I'm staying healthy, or at least mostly healthy.
That's awesome. I love that. And it gives you also the vacation piece gives you a little bit of anticipation too, where you kind of know what you're marching towards
For sure.
a little bit. And I know that helps me out a lot too. I know there was a part where diet was a little bit heavier in college, with the dieting. I didn't do too well with the cold turkey piece, but it's like I know if I go eat well all week, I can order a pizza on Saturday, and that's what gets you through.
Yeah. The one thing about vacation, I think you're absolutely right. But I heard somebody say that. I think it was Carey Nieuwhof on a leadership podcast, and I won't get all his words right, but there was a lot of wisdom in what he said. He said, listen, time off isn't going to help if the problem is how you spend your time on. If you don't have rhythm in your regular work life, in your day, taking a week off, it might be required so you don't completely blow up, but it's not necessarily going to do a lot of recharge. You're going to trickle charge. So vacation is not like, I got to get to vacation so that I can recharge. No, it's actually, I just know this is a very intense season, so I need to go put a rhythm where I back off a little bit. And then that's part of that longer term. And so for the next few weeks after that, it's also going to be a little bit different. Because, the idea was time off won't fix what's broken in your time on.
Which is great, and it goes right back to what you were saying almost with the calendar piece, where you're intentional with the time that you have scheduled.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it really boils down to, even whether it's going to be a week off after an intense 6 weeks or it's an hour off in the afternoon after a bunch of hard meetings. So I think it's really good.
And different people do it differently. I'm a planner, I'm a strategist, and so that makes a lot of sense for me. I think other people can more naturally do that without having to necessarily put it in their calendar and everything. I do think in general the calendar is a really good tool, regardless of whether you're a planner or not. Because again, the tyranny of the urgent, even if you're like I'm pretty balanced and have good rhythm regularly without this calendaring, you can still find yourself in that place where like the urgent just took over everything. But, how regimented you are about it and how detailed you are, but I think that's a little bit, personal.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I love that, man. Well, as we wind down today, I want to wish you a very restful weekend off here. Thanks. And we would love, if you guys are listening to this midweek, make sure you guys come and join us this weekend for Robert Watson. I was reading over the notes beforehand. He was talking a little bit about listening to God and what that kind of like looks like in your life and everything. And it looks like it's going to be a really awesome message. He crushes it every time he comes out with us. So again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to email us at info@missionhills.org. Craig and I think we mentioned this last week, we'll probably tackle some sort of a mailbag at some point this summer. Yeah. So keep popping your questions in. We have a playlist on YouTube, Questions with Craig, which is another great place to get some resources if you guys have any questions. Craig tackles a bunch on that playlist as well.
Hey, also, you know what? Is this too self-serving to say? Give this podcast a 5-star review.
We would love it.
Give it a thumbs up. I mean, that's the best marketing to get. Hopefully this is useful to you. Help us get it out to more people by giving us a thumbs up or a 5-star review and maybe even a share.
Yeah, we would love that. Thanks again, you guys, and we'll see you next week.
God bless.